Welcome back to Major Antonio's presentation of The Last Days of Fort Vaux by Henry Bordeaux. Book 3, The Stranglehold. 1. Stones and Men.
What is the condition of that luckless fort of Vaux, which for 100 days since February 21st has received its daily ration of shells, 10,000 on an average for the district, and of all caliber, but chiefly of the heaviest, the 210 millimeter, the 305 millimeter, and even the 380 millimeter? It must have been hammered, pounded, bruised, crushed, scoured, pulverized, unusable and uninhabitable. Can it be anything but an indiscriminate heap of stone and earth, of rubbish of all kinds transformed into dust or ashes? Where the Emperor William's artillery has done its work thoroughly, we are assured that nothing is left. Attila boasted that no grass grew where his horse's hoofs had trod, and indeed the outward aspect of the fort is deplorable. The superstructures are entirely destroyed, and the top is now nothing but chaos. The southern entrance has given way, and for a long time has been unfit for use. In order to make one's way into the interior, one passes either by the double transverse gallery to the northwest or by the single transverse gallery to the northeast. The double transverse gallery has been staved in, but an exit has been fitted up, an exit for the use of the troops who succeed each other in the western sector of the fort, Curtain, Besançon Trench. The passage connecting it with the main pile has crevices in it near the descent into the ditch and has been smashed in near the barracks. In the same way, the single northeastern transverse gallery has been pierced near the exterior of the fort and provides a passage for the details that hold the eastern and northern trenches, Fort and Belfort trenches. These two entrances, which are on the side of the trapezoid nearest the enemy, will be to the advantage of the assailant. It is here, if anywhere, that he will penetrate. But can he expect a resistance in such a ruin? The 75 turret has been seriously damaged. It can no longer communicate with the barracks. The whole place is of little use for defensive purposes. The two armored observing stations have escaped destruction, but machine guns cannot be set up in them. The single transverse gallery to the southwest is in fairly good condition. Its line of communication, which had been blocked up, has been re-established. It has no external opening. Finally, the barracks have cracks in them, but are still serviceable. A garrison can take shelter there. The double barbed wire entanglement which surrounded the fort is now in fragments, or buried in the shell holes. The resisting power of the counterscarp, the escarp, and the ditch that lies between them cannot be reckoned upon. The walls have several breaches and have sunk down, and the ditch, now half filled with earth, is no longer an obstacle. Such is this remnant of a fort, such are these inadequate defenses which the enemy is approaching. On March 9th, when he laid siege to it, he was still confronted with barbed wire, ramparts, parapets, covers for machine guns. Now, if he succeeds in reaching it, and he is nearly touching it, he is less than 200 yards from it. He can find his way into it without any marvelous acrobatic feats, and in order to make an entry, he will find the two exits from the northern transverse galleries gaping wide before him. There is now no longer anything, apart from the demolished trenches in front and on his flanks, to oppose his inroad. Nothing but men who await the storm, like sailors determined not to forsake their disabled ship. The commander of the garrison is Major Raynal of the 96th Infantry Regiment. Though wounded, he refused to wait until he was cured before returning to duty. Born at Bordeaux, where his father was a bootmaker, on March 7, 1867, of a family that originally came from Montauban, the future defender of Vaux was educated at the Angoulême Lycée, then enlisted in the 123rd Regiment on March 15, 1885. 5 years later, he entered the military school of Saint-Maixent and left it as a second lieutenant on April 1901, having gained the first place out of 328 candidates. A captain at the outbreak of the war, he was appointed battalion commander on August 24, 1914. How he led his battalion may be shown by a quotation from an army order. Commanding the advanced guard of his regiment on September 14, 1914, and getting into touch with the strongly entrenched enemy at a brief distance from early in the morning onwards, he at once took up his position on the tactical points, and by strenuous efforts kept his battalion there under fire from German rifles, machine guns, and heavy artillery. Seriously wounded in the afternoon, he retained command of his battalion, staying in the first line in order personally to direct the fighting in close and difficult country until his loss of blood became so great that he was compelled to retire. At Crouy, on September 14th, a bullet from a machine gun ripped up his chest on the left side. He had been a Knight of the Legion of Honor since July 11th, 1900, and was promoted officer on January 11th, 1916, with the following description: an admirable officer of high character and military abilities. Badly wounded on September 14th, 1914, he returned to the front, where he has continued to render signal service. Was very badly wounded once more on October 3rd, 1915, when he was coolly and methodically proceeding to a reconnaissance of the sector in which his battalion was posted. His second wound was received at Tahur, in Champagne. A splinter from a shell in his abdomen broke the top of his hip bone before passing out through his back. Not being sufficiently recovered to take up an active command with any confidence, he asked for a post where there would be little moving about and plenty of danger. You will be given command of a Verdun fort. The major pulls a wry face. He would prefer open country. Then let it be the most exposed fort. Which one? Vaux, obviously. Very well then, go to Vaux. So off he goes. Such is the man to whom the destinies of the fort are entrusted. His force consists of a company of the 142nd Regiment, the 6th, under the command of Lieutenant Allarol, 120 rifles, a company of the machine gun section of the 142nd under Lieutenant Basie, some 30 artillerymen, 10 engineers, 20 hospital orderlies, stretcher bearers and telephone operators, and 20 territorials for fatigues. In all, from 250 to 300 men. But this is the normal regulation number of the garrison. All of a sudden it will be increased by some 50 machine gunners of the 53rd Regiment, then by wounded, who will be conveyed to the dressing station, then by details of the 101st and 142nd Regiments. The last named, screening the fort in front and on the flanks, will be pushed back into the interior under the pressure of the enemy's advance, by way of the openings in the transverse galleries. As early as June 2nd, the numbers begin to swell, and from 250 they will soon rise to more than 600. This will add to the already serious difficulties of the defense. In fact, whereas the replenishments of munitions and the engineering and medical services are on the whole adequate, the food supply has been calculated to last out a fortnight, and that for a garrison of 250 men only. The cisterns have indeed been filled, but the troops of the center have always looked upon the fort as a place to get water supplied by a merciful providence to save them from the thirst that is so terribly hard to bear on those arid, fire-swept hillsides. The commandants of the fort have constantly had to struggle against this tendency. Nevertheless, during May, they have succeeded in creating a reserve supply of water. This reserve supply has been brought in by fatigue parties, carrying water bottles that hold 3.5 pints each. Heroic fatigue parties these, liable at times to tragic interruptions. On May 29th, the reserve supply reached barely 3,500 or 5,000 pints. A garrison of the normal size, put on rations from the beginning, would have found in this amount resources for a period of 10 to 12 days and even more. The new arrivals will make it run out on the very first day. It will not be long before there is a shortage of water, and thirst will be the most cruel hardship of the Vaux garrison. Yet the defenders are ready, and Major Renal is waiting.
2. The Stranglehold tightens in the west. June 1st.
From May 31st, the bombardment of our first lines of La Cayette and of the Le Basile ravine, the Vaux-Chapitre Wood, the fort, and the whole district of Vaux, Damloup, and La Lofay, outdoes the usual battering to such an extent that one expects an offensive. At what point will it be aimed? At the whole front or at a small section? Faithful to his old tactics of advancing one shoulder and then another, the enemy attacks only the west of the fort. He will confine his objective to the Hardimont salient, which we still hold, the border of La Cayette Wood, the Le Basile ravine where the railway passes, the pool and the dike, and finally the Fumin Wood, a part of the Vaux Chapitre Wood lying to the east of Les Fontaines. If he reaches Fumin Wood, he will easily carry the series of entrenchments R to the power of 3, 2, and 1, which defend the slopes above the pool of Vaux up to a point near the fort. If he gains the entrenchments, the fort will be outflanked and will fall in its turn. Perhaps a single day will suffice for him to achieve that turning movement, which will win him the famous armored fort, whose pretended capture had sent a thrill of pride through Germany on March 9th. In 3 months, this ill-starred fort has been reduced to powder. No matter. It bears a sonorous name, and there should be no difficulty in taking it. What troops would ensconce themselves in such a shelter? In order to settle the matter once for all, the enemy launches the 1st Division, minus the 3rd Grenadiers, between La Cayette Wood and the fort, the 50th Division, between the fort and the Dam Loop, and between the fort and Dam Loop, a division comprising the 3rd Grenadiers of the 1st Division and the 126th and 105th Regiments of the 15th Corps. The vast number of effectives employed, destined even to be reinforced on June 5th by the 2nd Brigade of the Alpine Corps, shows the value that he attaches to this already sore-stricken prey. Our defense outside the fort is disposed as follows. At the Hardimont salient, La Cayette Wood, a battalion of the 24th Regiment, from the dike to the entrenchment R, to the power of 1, the 1st Battalion, under Major Fralin, of the 101st Regiment, 1 company at the dike, 1, the 3rd, under Lieutenant Gontal, at R to the power of 3 and 2, a platoon at each redoubt. From R to the power of 1 to the west of the fort, the 8th Company, under Captain Delvert, at R to the power of 1 the 7th in a defensive hook-shaped arrangement in front and to the left of the fort. The chain is carried on by the 142nd Regiment, under Colonel Tahan, who provided the fort with its garrison and who occupies in front and to the east the trench of Belfort with his 2nd Battalion, under Major Chavassou. The 7th and 8th Companies in the Belfort Trench, the 2 others acting as a support to the southeast. The 1st Battalion, under Major Mouley, occupies the village of Damloop with 3 companies, the 4th holding in the rear the battery of Damloop and the trenches of Solis, which from the battery rejoin the village. Finally, farther to the east, the 3rd Battalion, under Major Bouin, is put in charge of the Decour sector and the Lofe earthwork. The defense will be completed by relief drafts or reinforcements. On June 1st, at 8 o'clock, the enemy, after a strenuous artillery preparation, attacks that Hardimont salient, which we still hold to the north of the Le Basile ravine, where the railway and the road from Fleury to Vaux pass by. At the redoubt R to the power of 1, where the ground slopes down from the plateau on which Fort Vaux stands, Captain Delvert is in the front row of the stalls to watch the performance going on before him on the other side of the ravine. He sees the German infantrymen come out like ants from an anthill that some foot has kicked. Here they are making their way down towards our trench in the salient. They leap into it. The white smoke that emerges shows that a hand grenade duel is in progress. Farther up, swarms of light blue greatcoats try to scramble up the slopes of La Cayette Wood, already bathed in sunshine. They fall back in disorder towards La Fosse Côte and descend once more in the direction of the pool. The shells burst in their midst, but scarcely a man is hit. Then the Germans, in single file, creep alongside the railway. There can be no doubt on the point. The salient is lost, and they hold the ravine. They continue to defile up to the embankment slope of the railway. In ever-increasing numbers, they arrive at the dike and cross it. Now they are approaching Fumin Wood and the entrenchments. These entrenchments are little more than shell holes joined together, except R to the power of 1, which still retains a fortified aspect with its walls in reinforced cement and its lofty embankment. At noon, the assault is aimed at R to the power of 2 and 3. Their resistance at last stops the enemy, whose oncoming masses are mown down by machine guns and rifles. Every gray ghost that crawls along the slopes of Fumin is at once registered and fired at. For all that, the enemy has come very close. We have been able to capture from him, on the spot, a lieutenant, a cadet, and 4 soldiers of the 41st Infantry Regiment. He will not halt when so near the goal, in spite of this sanguinary setback. A battalion takes the place of the one that has been cut down. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon comes a fresh onset, which becomes a long, drawn-out contest, swaying backwards and forwards. The struggle is a fierce one in the communication passages and half-filled trenches, an affair of bombs, of bayonets, of hand-to-hand fighting. At 3 o'clock, however, the 2 entrenchments are lost. Not a man has come back to tell what has happened at the dike. As to what took place at R to the power of 2 and 3, occupied by the 2 platoons, a postcard from their commander, Lieutenant Gontal, written from a prisoner's camp to Colonel Lanous, commanding the 101st Regiment, brought the news a month later. I met Colonel Lanous when he had just arrived at a rest billet in a pleasant little village amid the wild dales of the Argonne. He had had a spell in the trenches. He had left off his jersey on account of the heat and was tuning a piano, which he had discovered at the house of one of the villagers. Such a stroke of luck is rare for a music lover. A flute and a violin placed on the table, and also the score of a classical trio, were awaiting the performers. "You see," he said to me, "musica me juvat," or delectat, I countered in pious recollection of my Latin grammar. With the same simplicity, he drew me a picture of the terrible week in which his regiment distinguished itself. Lieutenant Gontal's card cheered him like a march tune, but did not surprise him in the least. He was sure that things must have turned out in this way, and whenever he laid stress on the part played by any one of his officers, he hastened to do justice to the others. With the exception of himself, he gave some account of the whole cadre. Here, then, is the testimony of Lieutenant Gontal, which, in a few laconic words, sums up the defense of R to the power of 2 and 3. Wounded on June 1st, was picked up by the Germans and brought here. We carried out to the letter the order given, not to draw back an inch on any pretext. Thus it was that we were cut off, outflanked on all sides, and overwhelmed by weight of numbers. I was one of the last to fall, hit right in the stomach by a bullet fired at 10 yards distance. Lieutenant Hurray had his right arm fractured. Second Lieutenant Pasquier was wounded. Sergeant Major Farjean had his right hand crushed and his left thigh pierced by a bullet. Cadet Tokabins had 5 shell splinters in his body. Sergeant Lecoq was killed by a bullet in his forehead. The rest of the company suffered losses in proportion. This summary will tell you more than any lengthy comment of the way in which we understood our duty and satisfied the claims of honor. I would draw special attention to the bravery shown by Lieutenant Hurray, Cadet Tokabins, and above all Sergeant Major Farjean, who richly deserves the military medal. After each onset, there is the same moving refrain, the same list of officers and NCOs dead or wounded. The first postcard, written by Lieutenant Gontal on June 5th from the hospital, is addressed to his colonel. The second is for his wife at Toulouse. After fighting near Verdun for 20 days, he tells her, I was wounded by a bullet in the stomach. I was picked up on the battlefield by Germans and taken prisoner. The doctor thinks he will pull me through. Cheer up. I fell as a soldier should. Honor is not lost. But I was broken-hearted, for henceforth the war cross is out of the question. A month later, on July 13th, he gives fuller details, but the same idea haunts him. The brave fellows, he says of his company, nearly all got killed or wounded on the spot, and not one officer came out of the battle unscathed. Then he adds, how is it that my wound was not mortal? Once more Providence has intervened. Well, it will be the proudest boast of my life, not to have yielded 1 inch of ground and to have fallen at the post that my country had entrusted to me. All this, you know, makes me forget my pain and throws a halo round the memory of all the gallant lads of my company who were killed there. Finally, in August, he seems to have recovered from his wound and to be quite hopeful again. He asks his people in a graceful bit of writing for some 10 cigars, those good cigars of our sweet France, from which there rises, subtle and sly, the blue smoke that is like a corner of heaven mirrored in our lovely clear waters, the smoke in which you can see our hills, our great forests, our dear land with its 20 centuries of glory, honor, and faith, in short, that France for which I and so many others have so gladly given up the best part of our lives. To make his exile bearable, he will no doubt write verses. Is it not fitting to quote these letters from a prisoner before reverting to that day of June 1? In the course of this great day, the scouts, who had almost all volunteered, ensured the connections with unflagging devotion. One of them arrived at the commander's headquarters in Fumin Wood, crossing by what a marvelous stroke of luck, a very heavy curtain fire. "You might have waited a few moments," says the colonel to him in a fatherly tone. The man points to the envelope. "Yes, sir, but he has written urgent." 2 others are sent from the regiment to brigade headquarters. On the way, one of them is killed by a 105, and the dispatch that he was carrying is lost. His comrade goes back to the colonel's headquarters, asks for a copy of the dispatch, and starts off again to carry out his mission. The Germans, now in possession of the 2 entrenchments, make an advance in Fumin Wood. The task that lies before them is to storm R to the power of 1, the redoubt nearest the fort, and then they will approach the fort by the west and even the south. Our surprise and their daring will perhaps enable them to take it without striking a blow. Nevertheless, the colonel of the 101st makes his arrangements for the battle in the manner of an eminent orchestra conductor. He stations his reserves as a barrier in the wood, seeks and finds his connections in the Fontaines ravine, and has the ground dug into in order to gain a better grip on it. All the ensuing night he will make his men work without a break, profiting by the uncertainty as to the time that paralyzes the enemy's artillery, in order to find cover and to organize his front between R to the power of 1 and the ravine. The redoubt R to the power of 1 is besieged from the evening of June 1st. 2 machine guns, sweeping the hillsides, damp the enemy's ardor. In front of their range of fire, one sees clumps of gray bodies stretched out on the ground. In our trenches, the scene is already a tragic one. Everywhere the stones have been splashed with red drops. In places, great pools of violet-colored viscous blood have been formed and ceased to spread. Halfway along the communication trench, in the bright sunshine, corpses are lying, stiff and stark under their blood-stained canvas. Everywhere there are piles of debris of all kinds, empty tins of canned food, disemboweled knapsacks, helmets riddled with holes, rifles shattered and splashed with blood. In the midst of these ghastly heaps, a white shirt flutters, hideous with red clots. An intolerable stench poisons the air. To crown it all, the Boches send us some tear shells, which make the air impossible to breathe, and the heavy hammer blows of the shells never cease from echoing all around us. This is the picture of that June evening drawn by Captain Delvert, who is in command of the defense of R to the power of 1. R to the power of 1 will hold out until the 8th and will not be taken until the night of June 8th to 9. Just as an artist makes a rough cast before carving the statue in marble, so the defense of the redoubt is a sketch in miniature of the defense of the fort. As regards this episode of the fort, it is best not to interrupt the story, but to follow it to the end, looking ahead for a while. In any case, R to the power of 1 fights a lonely battle, unconscious of what is going on at its right or its left, not knowing whether the fort is alive or dead, imagining that it is still guarding one of the fort's flanks, when the enemy has already succeeded in passing between the entrenchment and the counterscarp. He who led the resistance has a peculiar right to act as its historian. Here, then, is a portion of Captain Delvert's admirable notes from June 2nd up to the evening of the 5th, when he was relieved. Captain Delvert's diary, June 2nd to 5. Quote, Friday, June 2nd, a night of agony broken by continual alarms. Yesterday we were not replenished. Thirst is what troubles us more than anything. Biscuits are being looked for. A shell has just made my pen slip. It fell not very far off. It landed in headquarters by the door and pulverized my quartermaster sergeant. Poor little C. Everything suffered from the concussion. I was covered with earth but was quite unhurt, not a scratch. 8:00 p.m. The Boches opposite us are emerging from their trench. Here, everyone is at the loophole. I have had grenades handed out to the whole company, for at the distance where we are, the rifle is useless. Here they come. Forward, boys. Stick to it. This cuts the wire and we fling our bombs. The Boks reply to us with rifle grenades, but their range is too long. Those who came out of the trench, taken aback by our reception of them, turn tail and make with all speed for Sarajevo, except those who here and there, sometimes in groups, are left stretched out upon the plain. From Sarajevo, the Sarajevo Trench, occupied by the enemy, is scarcely 50 or 60 yards from the redoubt. Shadows can be seen flitting out hastily and betaking themselves to the rear. Doubtless, this is the second wave that is ebbing back. To your rifles, lads, we must follow them up. CH sends up a red rocket. If we could use 75s now, the conditions would be ideal. All of a sudden, there is a spurt of flame behind us, with torrents of black and white smoke. It is as though fiery fountains were playing. There can be no doubt about it. They have forced a passage on the right and are directing a liquid fire attack at us. But now, from the conflagration, red and green flames are rising. What can it be? Ah, it's my store of rockets that is ablaze. At such a moment. Luckily, the Boches have been well looked after. Some poor devils rush down on the right with loud shrieks. A few of the men near me take alarm and leave the loophole. Back to your places. Good heavens, what do you think you are doing? And you pack of fools, bolting away because a couple of rockets catch fire. In less than 2 minutes, order is restored. The flames rise and bubble incessantly in the blackness of the night amid the shower of shells. Every moment, a fresh rocket gushes out into flame. The blaze reaches headquarters, and 2 tongues of fire soon dart out from there. First of all, we must save the grenades, which are quite close to us. A sack of cartridges has been caught in the furnace, for we can hear the crackling. The worst of it is that the walls are made of sandbags and also help to feed the flames. Then there are the shells and the bullets that never stop whistling. At last, all the cases of grenades have been cleared away. Shovelfuls of earth are thrown onto the fire, which is now beginning to grow less violent. Fortunately, our bombs have had a sobering effect upon the Boches. True, we must go and look for more grenades if we wish to hold out against a fresh onset. Nearly 20 cases of them have been emptied. 10 o'clock p.m. A man comes from the colonel's headquarters with 5 water bottles, one of them empty for the whole company. The bottles hold 4 pints each. This makes not quite 18 pints for 60 corporals and privates, 8 sergeants and 3 officers. The sergeant major, in my presence, distributes this water with scrupulous fairness. It has a taint of corpses. Saturday, June 3. I have not slept for nearly 62 hours. 2:30 p.m. The Boks are making a fresh onslaught. Keep cool, my lads. Let them get well out. We have to husband our ammunition at 25 paces. Let them have it hot and strong when I give the word of command. Fire. Jump to it. Crack. Go the rifles all together. A smart piece of work. Well done. Black smoke rises. We see batches of Boches spin round and fall. 1 or 2 get up on their knees and manage to crawl away. Another lets himself roll down into the trench, so great is his haste. Some, however, advance towards us, while their comrades who remain in the trench riddle us with bullets. One of them even comes right up to the wire entanglement, 3 yards from the parapet. D lays him out with a bomb flung fair and square at his head. At 3:30, they have had enough and withdraw into their lair. The sun is shining brightly. A song rises to my lips. You are in good spirits, sir. Obviously, after all, when the die is cast. At 6 o'clock, the German stretcher bearers come out to pick up their wounded. I forbid my men to fire upon them. The Germans pass the dike without a stop. They occupy R to the power of 1. We are hard pressed on all sides. The situation is highly critical. The horror of it grips our very heartstrings. This evening, the Boks clear the way with heavy artillery fire. We shall certainly have to face a fresh attack. I order my men to reconstruct the machine gun emplacement, which has been destroyed during the day, and to take up a position with the one of the 2 guns which they have succeeded in repairing. For drinking water, as it is raining, the men have put their mugs outside and have laid down canvas. At 8:30 p.m., the gentlemen over the way emerge from Sarajevo. The poilus rejoice at this. At 15 yards, they send them such a violent barrage of bombs, supported by machine guns, that the Germans are not inclined to press the point. The attack is brought to a dead stop. At 10 p.m., an officer appears in my quarters. This is to announce reinforcements, some details of the 124th and 298th Regiments, which have come to help in the defense. The sorely tried little garrison of R to the power of 1 is already greatly thinned in numbers. The shells begin to fall again. It is impossible to light a candle in the CO's headquarters. If the least bit of light is seen from outside, the Jack Johnsons land on the spot. In order to make out my report for the past 24 hours, I have to crouch down in a corner, under a blanket, and write on the ground. As for taking a moment's rest, that is not to be thought of. The bombardment does not break off for a single minute, and what is more, we are so much pestered with fleas that we scratch ourselves as if we had the itch. Sunday, June 4th. They're not up to taking R to the power of 1, those Boches, cries one of my poilus to me as he passes. I was at the redoubt, organizing the connections with my left. Well, about 24 hours ago, you had a pretty grueling time of it here, remarks X to me. Yes, you saw those grenades being handed out. At the same moment comes a significant crackle. A duel of grenades is in progress. I hastily scramble up the narrow path which leads me into the trench and reach my post in the fray. The weather is superb. The bombs are roaring on all sides. A grenade duel is a fine sight. The bomb thrower, firmly ensconced behind the parapet, hurls his bomb with the graceful swing of an athlete. S, crouching down near the grenade cases, calmly cuts the wires and passes them to us without a word. A dense black smoke rises heavenwards in front of the trench. At 4 o'clock all is over, but for a few rifle volleys. These are like the final sobs of a long spell of weeping. The sunshine is glorious and makes one realize all the more keenly the utter desolation of this ravine. Some wounded come down, streaming with blood. The dead are brought in, among others poor D, who rose up in the trench in order to smite down a Boche officer and had his skull pierced. At the end of the trench occupied by bomb throwers of the 5th and 10 men of the 124th, 2 Boches entered and were blown to atoms. A prisoner comes down. His face is beardless, his eyes are sunken. He lifts his bleeding hands and shouts, "Kamerad!" Our fellows take hold of him and hurry him off to the dressing station. I go to visit that dressing station. It is a gloomy place. In a dark room with only one candle for a light, the patients are laid out, and one hears a constant groaning. They recognize me and call out to me. One of them has been asking for me long before I came in. He wants me to give him news of his brother. Another requests me to write to his parents. Poor Corporal O, whose face already has death written all over it, bids me a farewell that draws tears from my eyes. All are in dreadful agony, for they are parched with fever and haven't a drop of water to drink. In the curtain of the fort, another German prisoner, one of the 1916 class, a savage-looking brute. Next to him is an NCO, short, spare, light-haired, aged about 24, clearly a man of good breeding. He is an architect from the outskirts of Cologne. 6 o'clock p.m., the bombardment opens again. A stretcher-bearer, gasping for breath, comes to lean for a few moments against the wall of my headquarters. His plucky, honest, good-natured face is now worn and hollow. His eyes, with blue circles round them, seem to start out of his head. "Sorry, sir, but I am simply done up. There are only 3 of us stretcher-bearers left. The others have been killed or wounded. For 3 days, I haven't had a bite of food or drunk a drop of water. One feels that his frail body only lasts out through a miracle of energy and willpower. They are always talking of heroes nowadays. Here is a hero, a more genuine one, than many who are so acclaimed." The appalling cannonade goes on all the time. There are no green rockets. D, R, and I, under a low shed built of planks covered over with a few sandbags, wait for the shell which will blow us to pieces. We all look glum. The horror of the situation is clutching at our very vitals. 8 p.m., we are relieved. 11 p.m., a note from the colonel. In view of circumstances which have arisen, the 101st cannot be relieved. Thanks. What a disappointment for my poor lads. Lieutenant X is astounded at them, and with good reason. But I have only 39 left. Monday, June 5th. I should like to take a rest, but the fleas seem to have an objection. Since the relief has been countermanded, the company won't have any water today. As soon as I received the order, I sent out a fatigue party for water. It did not come back. It must have been overtaken by daylight. Probably it is held up at Tavannes or in the tunnel. Luckily it is raining. The men go to spread out canvas so as to catch the water. One's throat is parched with a terrible thirst. I am hungry. To eat bully beef with biscuit will make my thirst still worse. Coffee, sir? H is in front of me, with a smoking mess tin in his hands. Yes, it really is coffee. I can hardly believe my eyes. I found some coffee tablets, sir, so I said to myself, this is where I come in. I'll make coffee. Would you care to accept the first mug, sir? What good fellows they are. I am so deeply moved that I don't know what to say. But what about you, old chap, and your mates? We have some for ourselves. Well, I can't accept a whole mug, just a mouthful, that's all. No, no, sir, it's for you. Come on, V, pass along some mugs. I shall need the mess tin. I give in without further resistance. I carefully put the mug aside. It will enable me to eat a biscuit. What good fellows, what good fellows. 5 p.m. The order for the relief has come. If only it isn't countermanded. We shall leave our dead in the trenches as a souvenir. Their comrades have piously laid them out of the way. I recognize them. Here is C, with his velvet breeches, A, poor youngster of the 1916 class, and D, stretching out his waxen hand, the hand that once flung bombs so valiantly, and P and G and L and so many others. Alas, how many ghastly sentinels we leave behind. There they are, lying in a row on the breastwork, stiff and stark in their blood-stained, blood-dripping canvas, grim and solemn guards of this nook of French soil, where it seems that even in death they would fain bar the way to the enemy. 9:00 p.m. The relief. Unquote. The uninterrupted bombardment. The fire in the neighborhood of the grenade store, the daily onslaughts, the lack of provisions, the lack of water, the lack of sleep, the smell of the corpses and the asphyxiating shells, the mind preyed upon by the sense of death as the body is preyed upon by vermin. These men have endured all. And because the sun is shining, the captain finds a song rising to his lips. You are in good spirits, sir. Obviously, after all, when the die is cast. The whole attitude of our soldiers is summed up in that phrase. A private, as he passes, exclaims with a laugh, "They're not up to taking R to the power of 1, those boches." Yes, the whole attitude is summed up in this, to stick to one's post and to think nothing of self. The 6th Company of the 101st is relieved on June 5th in the evening by a company of the 298th, which will hold out for 3 days longer, under more and more critical conditions, but will be outflanked in the night of June 8th to 9. The enemy has managed to make progress on the right. The fall of the fort in the early morning of June 7th has given him a tactical point. R to the power of 1, however, throughout the whole siege of the fort, from June 2nd to 7, has floated, like a fishing boat that has mastered the waves, in the wake of the great vessel.
3. The Stranglehold tightens in the east. June 2nd.
On June 2nd, at 6 o'clock in the morning, Colonel Tahan, commanding the 142nd Regiment, takes over the command of the sector stretching from Fort Vaux to Decourt Bottom to the southeast of the fort. The plateau on which the fort is situated makes a bend immediately to the east towards Lahorn Bottom. Damloup village lies along the border of the Wouivre, at a point where the ground falls away from a promontory that separates the Lahorn ravine and La Gayette Bottom. This La Gayette Bottom skirts the wooded height of La Laufey, on the other side of which lies Decourt Bottom. It is worthwhile describing once more the lie of the land in this region. I saw Colonel Tahan on a Sunday in July at the new headquarters then occupied by him in the Argonne. This post hid itself coyly in a leafy retreat. The air was heavy with heat. It was warm even in the shade. In the branches of the trees, wherever the light penetrated, insects were humming. Here and there you came across a sentry or a fatigue party, disturbing with their footsteps all this luxuriant growth of the virgin forest. Not a rifle shot could be heard. Only now and then came a stray shell that seemed like some rude interloper. Without this reminder of actualities, one might have fancied that life had come to a standstill here, the same feeling that steals over one on a Sunday excursion to the country. At one time, this scrap of soil was fiercely wrestled over and watered with blood. At one time, was it then so long ago? In the colonel's thoroughly sheltered quarters, there was a very pleasant coolness, as in a cellar. A certain degree of comfort prevailed here. Armchairs, a table, and on the table a photograph, plans, maps. The longing for domesticity takes hold of the wanderer so very soon. The commonplace dugout which he will have to leave tomorrow becomes in a few moments, and for a few moments, a real home. All that the 142nd had done during those memorable June days was revealed to me there by its chief. He was careful to speak of it with fairness and moderation, and to restrain the enthusiasm which prompted him to set his men on a pedestal. That I learnt from the lips of those men who had returned from so great a distance. If you have not seen things yourself, the next best course is to question those who have seen them. When he came to occupy his post on June 2nd at 6 o'clock a.m., a portion of his troops placed at the disposal of the previous commander were already in line. Of the 2nd Battalion, under Major Chavasu, one company, the 6th, formed the garrison of the fort, and the 7th, 8th, and 5th companies held the approaches to the north and east. The 1st Battalion occupied Damloop and the Damloop Battery, the 3rd, under Major Bouin, Dicourt, and La Lofe. The night had been one of great activity. The fort had been subjected to assaults. Alarming rumors were going abroad. The fort, it was said, had been taken. Shadows had been descried on the platform. At daybreak, the air was still foul with the gas of countless asphyxiating shells. In the ravines, especially in La Horne bottom, the clouds left by these gases were trailing, like those mists that rise in the morning from the rain-soaked earth. At 8 o'clock, a sergeant runs up all bathed in sweat, scared and breathless. Damloop is lost. The boats are on the way. Immediate measures have to be taken. The artillery must open a curtain fire in front of and to the east of Damloop and in La Horne ravine in such a way as to prevent any advance on the part of the enemy. The alarm has been given to Bouin's battalion, and one of its companies, the 11th, under Captain Houtenet, has been ordered to make a prompt counterattack. The 4th Company, under Captain Cadet, which has been detached from the Damloop Battalion in order to hold the battery, mans the Salas Trench which connects them, in order to oppose any sortie of the Germans, should the latter attempt to debouch from the village. Finally, reinforcements are expected of the brigade, which places at the disposal of this sector Policier's battalion of the 52nd Regiment. Scouts who have managed to escape from Damloop come to confirm the news brought by the sergeant. With the aid of the dense, deadly vapors emitted by the asphyxiating shells, these vapors still hang about La Horne and La Gayette bottoms. The enemy has been enabled to penetrate into the village. The lookout men, gassed or taken unawares, have given an inadequate alarm. There has been fighting in houses and cellars, under a fire of flamethrowers and bombs, a difficult and tardy defense which has not saved Damloop. And the enemy will certainly try to advance towards the promontory. He is forestalled by Houtenet's company. It has taken that company only a little time to reach shelter, and by the La Bruche communication trench, running parallel with the pier at the end of which the village lies, to march upon Damloop. Only a little time, and how valiantly this force rushes to the rescue, officers and NCOs at its head. Only a little time, and the enemy has already consolidated his gain. An officer of the company charged with the defense of the Damloop battery, 2nd Lieutenant Brew, was an eyewitness of the struggle, and gives the following details. We see our comrades starting off, their heads lowered and jumping from shell hole to shell hole. The Germans, however, have brought up machine guns, which mow down our poor poilus, and these complete the task of shattering the counterattack. In a few minutes, the unlucky 11th is wiped out, and Captain Houtenet and 2 second lieutenants are brought in to us badly wounded. What is left of the company goes on fighting, but its effectives are terribly reduced, and this tiny band comes to take refuge near us. At this moment, Colonel Tahan, being apprised of the state of affairs, orders us to hold the battery at all costs and to prevent the boats from advancing. Captain Cadet strengthens the position with the 4th and the remnant of the 11th, and also with a machine gun section. We set to work energetically, for we realize that the Germans will try to take the important position that we are occupying. Throughout the day, we are on the alert. Thus, the counterattack on the 11th Company of the 142nd Regiment has been broken by machine guns set up at the exit from Damloop, scattered on the bits of roof that have been spared by the bombardments, or hidden behind the fragments of wall. Must it be started all over again with more numerous effectives? Pellicier's battalion of the 52nd is ready to march. Grenades have been handed out to it. But the few hours that have elapsed have given the enemy an opportunity of entrenching himself more strongly. Damloop on the western side is easier to defend than to attack. The ravines that skirt it, as far as the southern slopes, are in the hands of the Germans, and the promontory that leads to them is narrow. What is more, the reinforcements have been seen coming from Dieppe, and working parties have been signaled to the artillery on the western and southern sides of the hill. It would be preferable to fortify the Damloop battery, the southern slopes of La Gayette and La Horne bottoms, and to profit by the darkness of night in order firmly to consolidate this new line, which may hold its ground. And our men set to work, while our artillery goes on constantly dispersing the massed formations of the enemy and peppering the lost village of Damloop. The men dig and take cover. The deluge of iron has opened afresh and lasts the whole night long. There is a deafening uproar of continual explosions. Next day, at dawn, the situation has changed for the better, and our men resolutely await the attacks. The bombardment which precedes them demolishes the hastily improvised trenches facing Damloop and overpowers the battery. It is the tocsin that sets the conflagration going. It is not until 3 o'clock in the afternoon that the Germans come up for the assault. At this point, I have recourse to Second Lieutenant Brieux's narrative. Quote, "On the 3rd, the rising sun finds each man in his place and the situation improved. As in a dream, I wonder what this day has in store for us, and I inspect my men. They are certainly very tired, that can be read in their faces, but one can see that they are determined and can be relied upon. Yesterday I had a fairly long list of killed and wounded. The number has grown during the night, and this morning the bombardment claims fresh victims, among them my poor friend Lieutenant Matayer, killed at his post with a bullet in his abdomen. All of a sudden, about 3 in the afternoon, the German artillery, which has been raging for a few moments, lengthens the range, and we see the Boches advancing. They are mown down by our rifle and machine gun bullets. They falter and stop. We redouble our fire, while that of our machine guns ceases. I look and see, in the midst of the dust, rapidly moving shadows. These are Sergeant Favier and his men. He has come out of the fray without a scratch. He unearths his gun, cleans it under the enemy's fire, and with the help of his men is setting it up as calmly as if he were at maneuvers. About 5 p.m., to our astonishment, we see some 60 French soldiers sally forth from the German trenches. They come towards us. They have grenades in their hands and are on the point of throwing them. Fire! These are Boches! I had scarcely uttered this cry before the volleys followed each other in quick succession, and of the handful of Boches in French uniforms, those who were not hit fled like mad and regained their dugouts. Towards 7 p.m., the Boches advance on the battery from 2 quarters at once, the north and the east. Their object is to encircle us and seize the position entrusted to our care. But we hold out. The artillery delivers a curtain fire with considerable effect. The battalion of the 52nd sends us reinforcements, and we repel all attacks. Some Boches fall at a distance of less than 10 yards from the battery. It is true that we are in an agony of suspense, but we must stick to our ground at all costs. This is the order, and we carry it out. At 8 p.m. comes a fresh onset and a renewed defense on our part. At last we can breathe freely, bury our dead, send away our wounded, reorganize our positions, and make ready to drive back further assaults. It is the 3rd night, however, that we have had no sleep, and this ordeal of sleeplessness comes on top of all the hardships we have already suffered. What does it matter? No one thinks of taking a rest, for we must guard the territory placed in our keeping. The Germans have attacked the position of the battery from 3 sides. To the east, debouching from Damloop village in French uniforms. To the north, opposite the Salis Trench. To the west by going up the La Horne ravine. All their onslaughts have failed, but they have come up to within 10 yards of the battery. It has been a sharp struggle. Pellicier's battalion of the 52nd has provided reinforcements. The fire of Chevasseau's and Bouin's battalions of the 142nd, the one to the left, the other to the right, the one above the La Horne ravine, the other above the La Gayette ravine, has worked havoc in the enemy's ranks. His losses have been heavy. At the bottom of the ravines, the blotches of gray-green uniforms have grown more and more numerous. The order given charged us to resist on the spot with might and main and to hold our positions. It has been faithfully carried out. Shall we be able to carry out the second part of it on the morrow? In consequence of the losses and the men's exhausted condition, the situation is critical. The enemy continues to mass in the La Horne ravine. Our artillery fires on these groups. They scatter only to be reformed. And on the ridge of Vaux there appear German detachments, which our machine guns riddle with bullets. Is the fort still in our hands? That is the crucial problem. At daybreak, a patrol carried out in front of the battery brings in 2 prisoners. According to the information they supply, 5 companies occupy Damloop, while 3 others have left the village and are under orders to attack the battery. Throughout the whole day of June 4th, 2nd Lieutenant Brieux notes, the Germans bombard us furiously, and even in the evening they launch a vigorous attack. Our rifle fire brings them to a halt. It is at this moment that our brave captain and beloved comrade Cadet falls, struck by a bullet in his forehead. While 2 privates convey his body a little way to the rear, we go on fighting. At last, in the evening, we are relieved. The effective firing of our artillery upon Damloop, upon the La Horne ravine, and in front of the battery crumples up the enemy's forces, and the night passes without an attack. The relief by a battalion of the 305th is carried out without losses. On June 5th, there is a renewed bombardment and a renewed assault from the direction of La Horne. This assault is shattered before it can get into full swing. What took place at Vaux on the western side from June 1st onward also took place to the east on June 2nd and the ensuing days. On June 1st, the enemy flung himself at the Hardemont salient and gained possession of it. From that point, he penetrated into entrenchments R to the power of 3 and 2, but his way was blocked at Fumin Wood and in front of R to the power of 1. Up to the night of June 8th to 9, R to the power of 1 resisted all attacks. In the same way, on June 2nd, the Germans, taking full advantage of the poison gas attack that paved the way, occupied Damloop, but the Damloop battery deprived them of the outlet from the village. In vain did they rush against this battery on June 3rd and 4th with ever-increasing forces. They could not contrive to make an entrance. Its defense, more fortunate even than that of R to the power of 1, will be prolonged until July 2nd. Even on July 2nd, the enemy will be immediately driven out and will not come back, this time to hold it for good, till the 10th. Thus, the movement whereby it was intended to envelop the fort was hampered on the right and on the left by the auxiliary defenses, which were unable to save the fort, but, even after its loss, forced the enemy to slacken his onward pace. The fine defense of the Damloop battery was kept up by units reduced in numbers, limited to their emergency rations, suffering from lack of water, and unable to obtain any rest or sleep. It seemed as if the unexpected loss of Damloop made the position almost untenable. But is any position untenable when troops are resolute? Fort Vaux is about to reveal to us unsuspected powers of endurance.
This concludes today's reading of The Last Days of Fort Vaux by Henry Bordeaux. Join us also the day after tomorrow for the subsequent part. Subscribe to Major Antonio's channel. Thank you for listening, and so long.